Welcome to All Core Devs Consensus Layer Call 129. This is issue 973 in the PM repo. First off, we're going to discuss anything related to Deneb, Cancun, which is happening within the week from now. Then a few things up on Electra, a number of things related to, looks like APIs and testing, and then a quick discussion of Women in Ethereum protocol. Let's get started. Deneb, this is happening on the 13th. That is Wednesday. Today is Thursday, so 6 days. I believe morning in the US. Actually, I had a reminder. Thank you, Tim, for bringing that up. I believe Saturday night, Sunday morning in the US, at least, we're doing the daylight saving time thing. Be aware, almost all of these types of calls, the ACD and the breakouts are usually denominated in UTC, which does not change. So it's 7 a.m. for me right now. The next version of this call next week will be at 8 a.m. For me, the rest of the world changes at slightly different times. So just be aware that we're kind of going through that phase. Okay. Yeah, so mainnet launch on 13th. We'll have a call the next day. Obviously, if anything goes wrong, we'll have calls before then. But we can debrief that on the next ACD. Is there anything we need to discuss before then? Anything related to testing, any unexpected releases, any further stable things we've seen on DevNets, anything people want to bring up? I do see Terrence will have a release today / tomorrow, a recommended upgrade related to improvements.
Lighthouse also has a release being cut for Monday, I believe as well.
Gotcha. Ansgar, I did see a Zoom link in the Discord from Matt, so I didn't drop it. But if it's not there, please somebody add it. Chris?
Yeah, hey, Chris here from Flashpots. Just wanted to say that our stack is so far stable. There have been no changes in the last week or so. MEF Boost V107 was tagged last week. Relay with V029 from 3 weeks ago. The builder is still an active branch that we are merging this week. I just wanted to note that on our mainnet relay, we are only seeing about 20% of validators using the latest MEF Boost version, and about 60 or 70% sticking on the V1.6 version that is not Deneb compatible. So it probably would be good to give a shout out to proposers to upgrade to the latest MEF Boost version, because otherwise things won't work.
Got it.
At least you wouldn't get access to the external builder network from that on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that could be just a function of people not having upgraded yet. Tim or anyone aware of some monitoring tools, do we have any perspective on the amount of nodes that have upgraded?
I checked yesterday for nodes, so the best place for the CL seems to be Metrica. I'm pulling up the link. I'll post it in the dashboard. And since I checked on Monday we were at 26%. It seems we're at 51% now. So lots of last minute folks upgrading. And then the best place for EL node was Ethernets, but you have to update 3 different filters. So I'll find the number and put it in the chat once I've gone through the filter.
Yeah, it's Ether nodes, right? Not Ethernets.
No, Ethernets. Ethernodes is basically deprecated. It seems it still has stats about who's supporting the merge. So
gotcha.
And then the one thing we do not have that I'll give a shout out to is I didn't find a great validator weighted dashboard for updates. So if somebody listening to this wants to build this, something tracking the actual validator nodes rather than only than all the nodes on the network, that'd be great.
It's non-trivial to do that. It's not probably impossible.
Yeah. Consider we're starting from nothing, so like anything is probably an improvement on that.
I think relays can tell us at least about all validators that are not locally building, which is already quite a bit.
Right. Okay, so I mean, those numbers aren't shocking to me a week out and seeing kind of that movement from 20 to 50%. If you're out there, update your node, assuming that you want to go through this. Yeah, anything else on Cancun?
Just to wrap up from my side, at Flashbots, we are going to be on standby, of course, and available and around. And we are trying to work with all the other relays as well, that they have people on deck and that everything is going smoothly. And if not, that there is countermeasures that are deployable quickly.
Good. And just to echo the chat, it does look like there's, it seems like most of the consensus layer client teams, if not all, have, you know, a recommended update on stability. Nothing critical, and that's only critical updates on the EF blog post are going to be added to avoid any sort of confusion. But obviously keep an eye out on Discord and mailing lists and things of your favorite client. Anything else related to the upgrade next week? Cool. Here we go. On to Electra EIP-7549 on-chain aggregation. This is a iteration on top of something that has been greenlit for Electra to further allow change the data structure to allow for on-chain aggregation. I think this is really nice to have. I believe we've touched on this in the call, Mikhail. Is this just kind of sanity checking that we do want to do the spec update, or what?
Actually, I shared a document which reasons about the parameters for max attestations and max attester stashings.
I see.
And also, this document does some complexity analysis and reasons about potential edge cases where this kind of on-chain aggregation, which is more tied on-chain aggregation than we had before, can have some adverse effects where we have like network aggregates with overlap and indices. We could easily include them. Yeah, we can easily include them now, but it will be like more tough to include them after this change. And
I see.
Yeah. And also, yeah, there is like one small proposal at the end of this document that I've shared. So I don't know if we want to go over this document or just keep it there for people to read it offline. But that plan already incorporated the first part of this doc that we have passed through during the last call, incorporated into the EIP PR. Yeah, and I think for this PR, we should leave it for a few days. Keep it there, and if there are no opposition, merge it.
Do you have a concrete recommendation that comes out of your analysis that you'd like to point out, just in terms of the parameterization?
Yeah, parameterization is like for max attestations, with this like tied on-chain aggregation, we should have eight max attestations, 8 attestations at max and block. It increases the capacity of the block in terms of how many different attesting, how many different views that validator is attested to we can incorporate. So currently we can incorporate 2 views into a block, assuming that committees are voting for, for more or less the same views. This parameter increases the capacity, but it does not increase the block size. So we can leverage on a tight aggregation. It can save us more space to incorporate more views on chain into one block. And was a fair comment that we'll have to include more. So on-chain aggregates will include potentially include more bits, aggregation bits. It means that if we generate a slashing event out of this quite dense on-chain aggregate, the number of validator indices in the attester slashing will increase significantly, increasing the complexity of attester slashing. So what we can do is to set just max attester slashing to 1. This is the only option we have. There is a section in this doc about attester slashing.
Right. Did you do an analysis on whether with one in these types of actual network fault cases that a high enough number could be included before the exit queue is run out? Because that was kind of the analysis on 2 in the past.
Yeah, so there is like imperfect aggregation section in the doc. And indeed, there are 2 cases where there are many different fork choice views, which is kind of like this proposal improves the status quo. The other one is that where we can get many network aggregates with overlapping indices, but they are quite, overlapping in 2 or 3 bits or whatever, a small number of bits. There is a proposal to, which allows to aggregate those overlapped indices. So yeah, a bit of analysis is done on that as well.
Okay, great. This is awesome. This is very needed. How about we leave this at this point with your stated recommendation? People can dig into the analysis, and we can surface this in the spec, and anyone else to chime in on if they disagree can do so.
I have a few comments.
Oh,
Can
yeah,
I
please,
mention it?
thanks.
Yeah, so I guess I read through it. I am a huge fan of Mikhail's changes, and I'm not speaking for my team, just I think the team since review it. But I can say a few things. So from the state transition side, I think it's fairly low risk. Those should be fairly covered by the SPAT test, so I have high confidence on those. And on the honest validator side, there are 2 sides of changes, right? The first side of change is the proposer side, that you're redesigning your attestation packing algorithm. And given the validator doesn't have a SPAT test today, this will require more testing and monitoring. And then on the second change is on the aggregator side, and this is where the document hasn't mentioned much today. And I think we need to add that to the documentation that say today, if you have 10 aggregators with the same slot, before you need to sign 10 message, and then with this change, you only need to sign 1 message. And because of this, you probably need some Beacon API changes, and such that today, I think Beacon Node has this kind of like the dayless design. So I think that part will probably need more thinking on how to change the Beacon API and validator interaction to solve that. So yeah, just some feedback.
Thanks, Terence. By the way, one question, if I may. I don't know. I don't know how Slasher software is implemented in terms of database schema, but if Slasher in general has access to network aggregates, so it stores the network kind of like an aggregate of single committees, then in general case, in most of the cases where we are slashing one or two validators, will not have this huge complexity, because if the slashing event, if a tester slashing is created from two network aggregates, the attester slashing complexity, data complexity will be the same as today. The complexity only increases if we use the on-chain aggregate and we use it to slash just one validator, because we'll have to include all validators attested in a slot into the message.
Got it. Any other comments on this before this surfaces as a PR to parameter changes and I guess further work on some of these other components? Again, take a look at the analysis and when there's a PR up, chime in if you disagree with the parameterization. Thank you, Mikhail. Okay, Ansgar, you wanted to give some update on the feedback and discussion around the proposal for issuance change that you brought up.
Yeah, hey everyone, I hope you can understand me. It's a little bit noisy here.
Yeah, sounds reasonable.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I just wanted to give a quick update. So basically, we published the posts, the one kind of general post of like where we think the staking economics should go in the long term, and then a specific proposal, kind of intermediary proposal for Electra 2 weeks ago, and briefly announced it on the ACDC last time already. Just to basically give a quick update, basically we had some kind of community feedback. It's basically been mixed feedback. Some people kind of followed the reasoning and agreed that would be a good idea. There was some more people who were skeptical. We're in the process of addressing that, kind of hopefully also in the future have some extra more like boiled down, crisp to the point kind of explainers on this. So this is going to be an ongoing process. Just one concern that was raised, and I just wanted to briefly address, is that the kind of the timing for Electra, and that of course an issuance change would be a significant kind of change to Ethereum. We were very much thinking that because it was such a small change, last time I linked like the proto EIP, that would be like literally 2-line change, the post curve adjustment for Electra, that we could add this basically very late in the whole process. So say assuming we're targeting something like in October 4th, then we were thinking that we can make like a final go no go decision on the specific EIP in say June, July. Just to maximize kind of the time for community conversation around this. So yeah, I just wanted to basically stress that point, that this is not a decision that we're trying to force through here, like on a 1 or 2 months timeline. Yeah. Other than that, I think again it's more going to be an ongoing conversation. Of course, if people have had a look at the write-ups and have kind of questions that we could address now, or like a short conversation we could have now on this call, then we'd be happy to. But otherwise, yeah, again, just wanted to give a quick thumbs up.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to take issue with your the claim of very late and say, how about not so late? But the summer notion that you then clarified with, I think is not unreasonable. Thanks for your update. Any questions for Ansgar? Okay, thank you. One of the lingering discussion points in Electra that I do, I think there's an eagerness to make a go no go decision soon is around inclusionless. And there was a breakout room, and there's definitely a group working on some R&D to better understand complexity. Mike, give an update.
Yeah, hey everyone. So yeah, just kind of catching up on everything post ETH Denver, and I think it could make sense to have another breakout room to just kind of continue circling in on the exact features of the design. There's been like a lot of back and forth in the Discord channel, and that's bridged into Telegram. So definitely take a look there if you're curious. I thought it would make sense maybe to do the breakout room after the hard fork, and I thought maybe next Friday, during this slot could potentially make sense because it's after the next all-core dev execution layer call. So yeah, that's kind of it. Happy to continue helping answer questions if people have them, and I guess the Discord channel is probably the right place to engage with the discussion.
I can give a general update on where like the specification is at, right? So today I think the spec is at the Xiaowei's upstream repo. So I think moving forward, it's probably better to move it to the official Ethereum repo because now I think spec is probably like 75% ready. And then in terms of all the components, I think right now, validator, honest validator, and execution API are the ones that's underspecified. Rest of them are in pretty good shape.
Thank you. Any other comments on inclusionless? Normally, I think breakout rooms are often on days that are not Thursday and 2 p.m. UTC, but that's not a rule. I think it's totally fine to do it after the execution layer call if people want.
Oh, sorry, I meant Friday, like the day
sorry.
after, during that slot. Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's go for that. I don't see any issue with that. All right, anything else on Electra?
I've talked to a number of people that are, I guess, more willing to check max EB than has been sort of indicated in previous calls. Like we've pretty much prototyped it in Lighthouse. There's still work that needs to be done on the spec, but it doesn't actually seem like a significant amount of work. And given that validator set size is a bit of a ticking time bomb, and we have, this proposed issuance adjustment, and issuance changes are always contentious, so it's no guarantee that the community would accept such a thing, especially like I'm pretty sure that would have significant ramifications on, say, the rocket pool token, for example. So you could expect they would push back. We already had Lido kind of indicating, but we just have no idea how the community is going to accept issuance changes. So if they don't like it, then really the only thing we can do is max EB. And while the spec needs work, just writing, like so far from what we've seen trying to implement a proof of concept in Lighthouse, it hasn't been a significant amount of work. So I'm wondering if anyone, like I haven't heard yet people push back on this. And
so the major pushback has come from Prism's claim of the complexity in their code base, which is potentially related to design decisions, but I couldn't speak to it too much more.
Okay. I suppose we can continue. I mean, if anyone on the call wants to offer any, from the prison team wants to push back, but I can also just get in touch with them later.
Yeah, and I surfaced that information not as a nail in the coffin, just as that I believe has been the primary rebuttal.
Okay, well,
Yeah, and I will note
Just-
that at least a couple members from a couple of different client teams that are not prison do echo their support in the chat.
and just to put it out there, like, I don't anticipate a lot of pushback from the execution side either. Like it would require partial withdrawals from the execution side, but like if they've already agreed to do 7,002, then partial withdrawals are like not a lot of additional complexity as far as I can tell. So just saying I wouldn't anticipate a lot of pushback.
Yeah, I believe on the 7002 component, the complexity would likely almost entirely surface in the smart contract, which gets to be written once. So it's kind of masked in terms of complexity. POTAs.
I just have a technical question. I don't want to repeat this thing of like the complexity, but I had one comment on the PR, which is this issue that we choose a random byte to decide the shuffling, and I wonder if this is just not as small enough when we increase the effective balance. Perhaps we need to change in the shuffling from 1 byte to a larger integer.
Yeah, we had someone looking into this. We didn't got a conclusion if it was super necessary or not. In my view, the detail we can run the numbers later and see if we have to bump it or not.
If that satisfies it, I would just like to, in general, raise a voice against the idea of using client complexity today to determine the future of a useful feature. I think as like all of our clients are now at the stage where we have a well-working test setup with well-working spec tests and so on. So, like a broadly useful feature, I believe, should lead to architectural changes in clients that are fairly safe to implement regardless. It might be a bit of work, but it's a lot less work than it used to be. And changes tend to be almost mechanical for many features.
Thank you. Okay. Given the proximity to interop in May and some of these outstanding things in discussion Electra, I would encourage us to attempt to make pretty firm decisions on both these proposals in 2 weeks. I know that's not an easy thing to do given competing views here, but let's surface both of these in 2 weeks and do what we can.
Sorry, I want to add, I understand the complexity pushbacks, but I see with what we mentioned last time with the leading POCs to, I guess, Prism and anyone else that's concerned about complexity, please let us know exactly what's concerning to you, and I will be willing to do a doc or basically help you guys figure out if we have found this complexity, or how that differs to you. So yeah, let's chat async, but we can translate our findings to you guys and see if we can alleviate the concerns.
Thank you. Other Electra items? Further comments, further discussion points? Okay, yeah, those that are in favor of either of these proposals, inclusionist and max EV, certainly the onus is on you to do the work, have the communications, dig into details, to try to push things one way or the other. General research spec discussion. Barnabas has a couple of points. Key A manager API standardization. Barnabas.
Yep. Hi guys. So this past weeks I've been looking into enabling key manager API on the validator nodes on Kurtosis, so we can start testing basic API calls using this. And I realized that every client had a different implementation for authentication for these endpoints, which makes it a bit problematic to add it to Kurtosis nicely. So it would be good if this could be spec'd out properly, same way as we spec'd out the JWT secret for communication between the EL and CL. I'm not sure what the different CL teams think of this.
Where does the JWT spec live again?
I thought it was execution spec, maybe.
It's in the execution APIs in the engine spec folder.
This would likely live in the Beacon APIs, not the spec repo.
I think it should live in the key manager APIs repo, or
yeah,
maybe...
most likely in the key manager APIs repo would be the best place for this.
I guess the most problematic thing is that every client is maybe handling certificate in different ways, because at least for tech we want to have HTTPS by default enabled, so you need to specify key store, and you have to create a key store and then to spin up HTTPS, and then you can have the authentication on top of it. So maybe every clients have different way of creating those key stores, certificates, stuff like that.
I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily pushing towards one or the other. I would just like to see a standard implementation across the board. So, and I think HTTPS certification creation is a pretty standard thing to do. So it's not Java specific or Go specific or anything. So authentication should be able to be a standard thing.
So do you want to flesh out a doc or a PR there to make the design space conversation a bit more concrete? You probably have a better view of the different design decisions across clients than anyone else here.
Yeah, sure.
Any other comments to Barnabas before we move on? All right, next up, also from Barnabas, mixed validator client beacon node testing. As we all know, there is a standard API that is utilized, but I think more often than not, people have a single validator client connecting to its partner with the same client. But Barnabas wants to know, is it expected that these should work cross, and should they put effort into testing?
We fix any bugs that people report. Above all, because we've seen a lot of people that run 2 beacon nodes, and then some of them run different clients in the beacon node.
So it's an expected behavior that this should just work with every client combination.
And I think it's a desired behavior.
Oh, it's desired behavior. Okay.
Yeah, I would say the Prism's validator client is still not ready. But I
on
believe
the
some-
standard API.
Yeah, validated client on the standard API, because it's still using gRPC behind the scenes. There is a REST option, but it's still being cleaned up. Yeah, we're making steps forward on that.
I mean, so I would say that in general, it should be working. It is work. I know some teams are already using the REST option, and have some issues, but more or less it works. So I would say that feel free to test the Prism validator client with the REST flag with other beacon nodes, and I would be happy to hear any feedback. So actually, I would be really interested if this becomes a reality, that we have a good test harness with different clients. It would be a good way to check cross-client compatibility and everything. So yeah, it's not 100%, let's say, as we would like it to be, the REST one, but it is working. So yeah. And as you mentioned, the expected outcome is that it should just work out of the box. If any combination doesn't work, I would say there's a bug somewhere. So the expectation is that every combination should work.
Okay, yeah. So any testing you can do here, I think would be really valuable. Any other comments for Barnabas?
Yeah, if you're writing anything that tries to do something about this, there are a few gaps in testing. One is the rewards API, and the other one is the consensus block value, and the third is doppelganger. No, liveness it's called in the API. All those 3 are kind of underspecified in my view. And all of them are also kind of intricate. If some beacon node does them slightly differently, we'll get a very bad outcome if we mix and match clients. So it would be nice, for example, that there are comparisons of these API between clients and the values that they actually return for a given, say, head.
That's a great lead into Dustin's next issue, which is generally the treatment of the specification of where block rewards do surface in the beacon APIs. Dustin, do you want to fill us in?
Yeah. So there are, and I linked here actually, so people don't have to go back to the GitHub issue for their meeting. I'll link the gist here as well. Okay, so there are relatively new, last several months to a year, and not necessarily universally implemented yet, APIs that involve either a new option in the case of produce block v3 or the rewards, which is not universally implemented. The idea of a consensus block value or the value of constituent parts of a consensus block, in the case of the block rewards API. And this is what Jacek was, I think, explicitly partly getting at, is this is, I would say, underspecified. Now, I may have simply failed to find specification or documentation which exists, but yeah, I found, and in particular, we've had discussions in the Nimbus team about how to interpret this, and we're not sure. So, and we think that if we're not sure, perhaps that there's not enough explicit guidance to ensure interoperability. So this ties into and is a little bit it overlaps with the idea of what sort of testing for it and interoperability testing in an empirical way. But even if Barnabas, say, goes and tests things, and turns out everybody magically agrees on how to interpret this, that's sort of coincidental. The specs do not specify enough to say this, and now that's sort of the broad thing, and I sort of try to keep this relatively brief, but to say the specific, there's two basic categories, and people can read in detail this, what I linked. But one of them is the proposer index changes. I mean, there's various places in the beacon chain spec where it says you do this during block transition, the proposer index's balance changes. That's, at least I think, by my reading, unambiguously part of this reward value, a consensus reward value, both for block reward and for produce block v3. That's, I think, probably uncontroversial. I don't see how you can interpret it in any other way. I think what's less clear is there's one view. I think the high level view of this perspective is the block value is the amount by which the block changes the proposer's balance. Period. That's, and it's easy to state, but it turns out to have a lot of sort of, let's say, complications or nuances, because you can imagine epoch blocks, or I described some of the self-slashings, or if you're part of the sync committee, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of edge cases come up, which, and there's another perspective which says no, the block value is better viewed as, even though it says it's consensus block value in the header of produce block v3 response, it says it's something like the proposer rewards value, which is to say, it's, even if there happens to be accidental integer aliasing on the validator index is equal, or the whistleblower index for slashing is equal to the proposer index, well, is that part of the block consensus block reward? So that's the question. And I mean, again, people can read the document I put up to, a little more, some more examples, but the point is that as Jacek is saying, I think all the clients need to agree, especially for produce block v3, because this is how validator clients are going to select their blocks. Now, it ultimately doesn't matter enormously. I mean, I have my preferences. I'm trying to present this neutrally, but it doesn't matter enormously which one is chosen, but people have to agree. Otherwise, there's going to be a skew in artificially in validator client choices.
Yeah, makes sense. I know that you're trying to present it neutrally, but do you have a perspective on the correct way to specify this? Because ultimately we need to kind of surface an opinion here. I think there's probably broad agreement that there is an ambiguity.
Yeah,
because that is clear.
I think the proposer index only one is the only. I mean, and here I want to be clear, I'm speaking for me. I think it's the only reasonable one. And I'll say that I won't, without reservation. I'm not gonna, you can find other people who disagree with me on this one. But in particular, I think the basic argument for me is along the lines of, well, if you swap out that proposer, so you can run a couple of sort of different sort of thought, well, again, trying to cut a few sentences. You can run this thought experiment in a couple of directions. One, you swap out the proposer, but it's otherwise the same block, and with the same sync aggregations, the same slashings. It's a little weird, I think, that and unexpected that somehow, because that slashing would have happened anyway. That sync aggregate penalty would have happened anyway. It's a little accidental that it happens to be part of a block proposed by that validator. So that's one direction. You can also that's keeping the proposer constant. You could, or so it's keeping the non-proposer validator constant. If you keep the proposer constant, but then allow the non-proposer validator to change, and you could say, well, there's two non-valid proposer validators which missed their sync aggregate or sync committee contributions, and at some point, and it's a little strange to treat them differently in some sense in terms of accounting purposes, because one of them it happens to be the proposer completely accidentally and one not. And indeed, if you have a small enough validator set, as some of the tests do in the consensus spec test, you can be in the validator set, the sync committee rather, 2 or 3 or 4 times. And again, it's just kind of strange to me to.
Yeah, I guess
yeah, go ahead.
And I see that. I guess I come back. My counter argument would be like, what is this used for? This is used for a validator client maximizing their reward, and so and or penalty, or minimizing their penalty. And so like seeing 2 blocks and actually seeing that one gives you 2 more GWAY than the other due to some of these happenstance things, which could be node specific, because one might have certain messages that it can include or pack in a certain way that the others do not. You know, from a use case perspective, it seems like I want to know that.
Sure. And in general, validator clients are free to choose other information if they want. And there I would argue that it's still, I think, in favor of a cleaner split, even for what you're describing, between the proposer reward proper and having that be readily accessible, and then having these other bits of information which are also accessible. The validator client, when it sees even the sort of blinded blocks, which is tied to transactions and such, so they can make that decision already. Can see, oh well, this sync aggregate includes my contribution or doesn't include my contribution, or, and this is another reason I think that it's to allow a certain flexibility to say, if you have a node, or let's say you have a validator on a node that has 100 validators on it, and at any given time, one validator happens to get that block, but the other 99, like they may or may not have, I mean, that node probably should care, let's say, about its validators as a whole, not just about the one validator which happens to be proposing. And a validator client, whether it's a beacon node or validator client, and splitting this out allows that kind of flexibility on the part of large, or not even large, even several. Like it's node, or several validator nodes.
Okay, so the optimization function isn't always just directly towards the single proposer in many cases.
Right. So, and the other thing that I would point out with regard to the optimization function is that it can be, at least my suspicion is, and I haven't rigorously looked at the math on this, but I did write this in the note linked as well, is that for sync aggregates, it is probably the case that it makes sense to, yes, optimize the way, if you have a block being offered which doesn't have your sync contribution, then that should in fact be weighted. There's no real advantage in letting that in. If you have a slashing, if you can be your own whistleblower on being slashed, that's still to your advantage. And my suspicion is that it's better.
Sorry, to your advantage, meaning assuming someone else is going to include the slashing, so you might as well include it yourself. Is that the assumption?
Yes. So if you can include the slashing in your block and be the whistleblower, well, the slashing has already happened. It will come in the next few blocks anyway, even if there's a lot of slashings, a mass slashing. So and so while I can't sort of vigorously defend that right now, I will say that that kind of consideration certainly is something that is can come up. Whistleblower for sure. The others I don't know, but so it can be a little distorting to say, well, this block hurts me a lot. I really, really don't want this block. Yes, but you would get the penalty next block anyway. Like it doesn't. So I would argue for optimization purposes, it's still useful to be able to split this out. And of course, look, ultimately, it's a symmetric argument. You can say if validator clients can add this back in, well, validator clients can take it out. You can have the aggregate, as it were. You can have the combined version of this and then subtract just as easily as add. So it's kind of a version of, at that point, I guess, conceptual clarity, or
Sure.
I mean, there's other arguments.
Okay, are there other opinions on the direction this should go in before someone makes a PR to clarify the specification, or do we need to kind of put this up in an issue for discussion? But yeah, any opinions and perspectives at
Yeah,
this point?
so I have an opinion, not a strong one, but still. So question is, how much of a discrepancy would there be in different client implementations if this is not specified, that tightly, and there might be some discrepancies between clients? Because if we're talking about a fugue way, for example, then my question is, does it really matter? Like, wouldn't it be okay if different implement different clients just return the block value like within some delta of each other, instead of trying to specify every single small thing so that we make sure that it's exact, that the results are exactly the same up to one way even. I'm just thinking how much work it is to make sure everyone aligns and how much discussion it will take versus we are just okay with having these values a little bit different maybe, and and we're just fine with that, I guess.
Meaning the common practice is if I see in blocks within some delta, I pick randomly.
Well, maybe you pick the one that you see that is the highest, right? But
Right, but at that point you might then the interpretation of the spec becomes a heavy bias on which one will be the block producer, correct? Like if client A does it a slightly different way, then 90-something% of the cases, client A might just look more profitable when actually they might be the same.
Right, that's true. Okay, yeah, that's a good point.
The other point here and is that related and potentially a little distinct, but I would say, but is why is worth kind of standardizing this, even though for Fuse block V3 people might have this argument that some amount of sloppiness is okay, is that ideally it should match get block rewards. This is kind of why I brought them up together. And my suspicion is that there are relatively few people, although I don't know, maybe, who are willing to have both of those be just kind of randomly variable. And then, so I would suspect the one is gonna, whichever, and people might have different views on which one they care more about being precise, but I said whichever that is, that should probably kind of constrain the precision of the other as well. Sure. POTUS, or I don't know, somebody raising their hand. Okay.
Yeah, I want to make an argument that I don't strongly hold, but anyways, it's a half-baked argument, which is the consumer of this presumably is a client like Vouch, who's choosing between different beacon nodes, which block to sign. And I feel like this is so specialized that essentially there's any other one using this, or perhaps there's some other clients and some people that developing validator clients that are doing this. But this is sort of like pushing us, like having 6 different clients, 5 different CL clients discussing on API, getting into agreement what we need to specify, getting to testing, getting to spec test, and taking our bandwidth for something that perhaps can be done downstream. I don't even understand why we even agreed into supporting this if the consumers are restricted. I would try to study this market and try to see if we can actually send this work to the people that are consuming these endpoints instead of ourselves coding them.
Without consistency between the BNs, I don't know what. So for one, it's not just.
Well, you can get all the blocks and decide and compute this yourself, right? So if I'm a client that I'm faced with core devs don't want to implement this in the beacon, then I can just get all the blocks and do the software that computes what I'm going to be getting.
Yeah, and you can pass in indices and essentially do a diff on them.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable coding this for just a few consumers. I mean, if RPC providers are using such an endpoint, then I'm happy. But otherwise, it seems like far-fetched.
Yes.
So, yeah, you need a state to compute this actually. So that's the first point. The second point is that the Nimbus VC supports this, selecting between BNs based on profitability of the block. And I believe Lighthouse does as well. I would be surprised if they didn't, because I think they support multiple BNs. And at that point, you have to ask yourself, yeah, exactly. And there's already 2 of us supporting selection of blocks, and users will be very confused if randomly, because they're using some particular client, that client gets either more blocks or no blocks. I mean, this was the whole impetus behind Produce Blocks v3, that we would unify block production value for both execution and consensus, so that you could compare 2 blocks and potentially blinded blocks and see which one is best for you. And this is also a way of like resolving the problem of MEV blocks. If ever you happen to get a bad MEV block that isn't profitable, like obviously your locally constructed block should be preferred. But like how much you gain is the sum actually of the consensus value and the MEV value and the transaction value or whatever it is, right? So I think this is just really basic functionality that just makes sense to have if we envision a future in which there are multiple block sources and you need to compare them. Like it's that simple. And and that's actually a comment against, or it's a difficulty when you want to compute the block value from attestations or your participation in aggregates and in sync committees, because you don't get an ETH value, you get like, a random number, and then you can guess the ETH value, but you can't really determine it without the full state, because it depends on a whole bunch of things, like the size of the active validator set, and the active validator set depends on, who's been slashed, and like it's a mess.
Okay, so
yep.
For the Nimbus validator client and the Lighthouse validator client, you're presumably running a bunch of beacon nodes, and hopefully you have access to one of those beacon nodes, which is a Nimbus one or a Lighthouse one. And in that case, you can just code yourself an endpoint that says, here's the block. Tell me how much money does it give you? So this is, again, something that you can do. You have the state in this beacon node. And you don't need to have all beacon nodes that you're connecting to giving you this value. I'm not saying that this is something that I'm strongly against. It's just that it's something that you can solve yourself without requiring support and agreement, which is the hard part. On all of these API discussions, there's always a lot of arguments, and even they discuss about names, if they should be capitalized or not. So you can avoid all of this by coding it yourself in your own endpoint.
Well, you know, we have a produce block v3 endpoint. It's actually the only endpoint that we have right now for producing blocks because the other two were deprecated. So like this is a discussion that should have been had when approving the v3 endpoint into the beacon API. But that ship sailed, and that v3 endpoint has this value. So if we want to roll back on that, we should release either a v4 or undeprecate v2, which never really was in production. And I think v1, we can't even use it because it doesn't have the necessary functionality. So we're in a bit of a bind here if we go down that route.
Okay. I do think it makes sense for Dustin or someone to service a proposal on standardization, especially given that v3 is the endpoint. And obviously we can always have a discussion of deprecation and movement on to something else if this is actually something people don't want to support. But it does seem like at least a few clients do. Dustin, can you move forward with the proposal?
Yeah. I'll make a PR, I guess, is a beacon API, because that's where both of these live. They're both beacon API endpoints. So, all right.
Okay, before we move on to open discussion, any other spec research related items? Yes, protests.
Just a quick one. I asked this question on R&D. I was hoping that if there are EL devs that can confirm. The question is about sending different FCUs with attributes and whether or not the EL clients start building those blocks and continue updating those blocks. This is not really specified in the engine API. But it seems that Geth and Nethermind are supposed to continue building both blocks if we send them both FCUs with attributes. If this can get specified in the engine API, this would make our life much easier when reorging late blocks. So currently we need to so it's a bunch of edge cases because we don't update our head when a block comes late. But if every client already implements this and allows for different FCUs with different IDs at the same time, then we could just simply import the block, do everything as we do normally, just update the head and just choose the right ID at the time of proposing. It'll make our code much simpler. So take a look in this it's in the execution dev channel in R&D.
Thank you. Any comments on that? Great. Any other research or spec related items? Who does?
Well, anyways, I also wanted to point. So you asked the question on a couple of calls ago about EPBS, whether or not there could be a partial builder safety. I posted a short note on ETH Research. I'd love if someone can give feedback. Up to now, I think Francesco just replied something. which is guaranteeing builder safety and reorg resistance up to a collusion between stakers having 20% of their stake. And there's some arguments there, but I'd like to hear some more feedback.
Okay, this is payload boosts in EPBS.
That's correct.
Got it. And I'll call out that that also links to another post from a few days prior, EPBS design constraints, which is something that on the breakout call was pretty high value. So also please take a look at that. Okay. Anything else on spec research related discussion? Okay. Pooja, you have something to discuss?
Yeah. Thank you, Danny. Hello, everyone. I'm Pooja Ranjan from the Ethereum Cat Herders. I'm excited to be sharing about an inspiring initiative that's really close to our hearts, the Women in Ethereum Protocol Group, also known as a WIEP. This is a new working group in collaboration with the Ethereum Foundation, Ethereum Protocol Fellowship, and the Ethereum Cat Herders. It's basically a movement towards inclusivity, diversity in the Ethereum blockchain development, with the main goal to encourage and onboard more women developers for protocol development. I'd like to thank Piper Mariam, Carrie Claus, Tim Bako, Josh, and many others from the Ethereum space for their support during the launch event in HCT Denver last week. And I'm also happy to announce the celebration of International Women's Day with WIEP. So we are organizing an hour-long webinar on March 8th at noon EST with inspiring speakers from Ethereum ecosystem, including researcher, product manager, and fellows from the earlier cohort of Ethereum Protocol Fellowship. The invite link can be found on Twitter handle at WIEP team. Anyone listening to this announcement now or later in the recording, if you or someone you know may be an aspiring Ethereum protocol contributor, please reach out to Shai-Wei Wong, Ladonna Higgins, or me. It is a collective effort that we want to bring the real change. So let's collaborate, learn, and grow together. Thank you.
Thanks, Pooja. Any questions or comments related to this effort? Great. I have an announcement. Starting April 1st, I'm going to take some time off for 3 months. This is a well-oiled machine. You won't even notice I'm gone. Alex Stokes will chair the call. Yes, it is. This is not an April Fool's joke. Alex is going to chair the call. Xiaowei is going to be there, providing some extra support. And generally, I think we should be a good spot. So don't worry. If you have, I'm going to try to be totally unplugged for a few months. So if you have things that you want to talk about before then, please get in touch with me. If you have things that you think you would need help with me during that time frame, I can help you now, and I can make sure that you have the resources you need to get help when I'm gone. So just hit me up if you have anything. Cool. On that note, let's close the call. Thanks, everyone. Happy upgrade this coming week. It'll be exciting.
See you guys.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Bye.